Coming up on today's episode of the Moneypants Superpower Hour. Criticism kills motivation. But from a practical standpoint, isn't criticism necessary for meaningful progress to take place? When using Moneypants, how can you avoid the poison of criticism, but still help your family members make necessary changes and improvements? Today, we're going to talk about what exactly qualifies as criticism versus what qualifies as correction. We'll talk about how the two have very different motivations and very different effects on the person receiving them. We'll talk about how to approach problems in a way that helps motivate others. We'll talk about why you shouldn't feel guilty or shy about giving your children a healthy dose of corrections. All this and more, but first, the joke of the day.
Never criticize someone until you've walked a mile in their shoes. That way, when you do criticize them, you're a mile away and you have their shoes. Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Moneypants Superpower Hour. We are your hosts, Hannah and Fontaine Judd, and we're the proud parents of 8 sons and 7 daughters, ranging in age from newborn to college student. We're both BYU graduates and the creators of Moneypants. Head on over to CaptainMoneyPants.com to learn more about what we do and what we're all about. We believe every person on this planet has been given at least one superpower to help them accomplish their unique mission in life. But the only way to unlock those superpowers is through work ethic. That's when greatness happens. And that's where Moneypants comes in. Moneypants is the complete tool set for cultivating work ethic in all aspects of a person's life. And today's topic is never criticize. And this is another one of the 3 nevers. You know, never lie, never criticize, and never argue. And Hannah, we heard this when we first got married. There was a prominent, well, I don't know how prominent, but there was a family psychologist person that we had listened to, and we liked a lot of his ideas. And this was one of them. Interestingly, he was actually, we didn't agree with some of the things he said, and we put them in practice and found out some of them didn't work. But a couple of these concepts, he was right on the money. And one of them was never lie. And we talked about that one last week, where you don't want to lie to your children. Just the lessons that teaches them, it's all sorts of bad. But the other one that we really like, there are 2 more, but the one we're going to talk about today is to never criticize. And when I first heard that, I'm like, what? That didn't resonate with me. I'm like, of course you need to criticize. People do things wrong. You have to correct them. You have to, straighten them out. It seemed a little extreme. Never criticize. It just seemed like, it's too easy to say that. But after dealing with it and thinking through that and kind of working through that for years now, Hannah, he's right. He's right on the money. And this is something I really struggle with.
Well, it very much applies to Moneypants as you're implementing Moneypants, because there are many opportunities during Moneypants where you could fall into criticism. One is during job inspections,
forget
and the other
forget Moneypants. How about just being life?
Yeah, but
you're right.
But the thing is Moneypants is about motivating people to become their best.
Right.
And nothing kills motivation like criticism. And so one of my pet peeves is if I've made a meal, like a nice dinner or lunch or anything, and I sit everybody down and somebody criticizes the meal. I don't like this. I don't want to eat this. Or
no. Remember, we would have guests over. I remember one guest in particular walks in the house and goes, "Ew, what's that smell?" And you're like, well, whatever the smell is, you're not getting any. So it doesn't matter. Right off the bat, you're like,
no, you don't want to feed them. You're like, you know what? Go get yourself a hamburger at McDonald's. Leave me alone. But the thing is I would probably overreact to it, but I'd get very frustrated because I spent all this time planning out a menu, all this work doing the grocery shopping, which is exhausting, and then preparing meals takes a long time, especially the type of meals I prepare where it's not just one dish. It's like, I've got the bread here and a salad here and the main dish and a dessert, and there are plenty.
And it's for 15 people.
Yeah, and there are plenty of things there to choose from and to eat. And I never require my kids to eat everything on their plate. Mm-hmm. I don't even require them to try everything on their plate. But I do require them to say thank you for the lovely meal and to not say anything bad about something they don't like. I say, if you don't like something, just don't eat it. But I don't want to hear you say that. I don't want to hear, instead I want to hear that you're thankful for the meal. So my kids all, when they're up to the table, they know, thank you for the lovely meal. Because if they start saying, oh, I don't like carrots, I'm like, okay, you may be excused. We'll see you at the next meal time. Hopefully you'll remember your good manners.
It only takes months. It only takes months. And then
because there were plenty of other things besides the carrots you could have eaten.
Yeah.
And so,
well, not only that, though, Hannah, you make fantastic food. Yeah. So there's really no excuse. But even if there was an excuse, it doesn't matter, because if, say, you're a single mom and you're trying to make ends meet and you're coming straight home from work and you don't have time, and so you microwave something for the kids still need to say thank you, because you earned the money to buy it, you went to the store and bought it, and you prepared it. Like, having that little ounce of gratitude goes a long way, because even if they complain, it's like, well, mom's like, well, why am I even bothering? Why am I even wasting my time, even preparing food? You guys go open a can of peaches. That's fine with me. I don't care.
Yeah. So
go microwave your own tortilla.
Yeah, exactly. And it just kind of, instead of getting, whereas when people were thanking me for the meals or saying, oh, I like this, or enjoying the meals, which people enjoy the meals more if nobody's criticizing, it would motivate me to go, oh, I'm going to do another menu, or I'm going to try something.
So criticism
new.
Totally destroys motivation, which is funny, because criticism can be a habit. And I know that's one of the things I have. That is a habit I have, is to criticize. Whereas the flip side is kind of like this attitude of gratitude, which is like the opposite almost of criticism. Not quite, but like you said, when you're at the meal and you're like, wow, thank you for making such a great meal. I don't know how much time you put into it. Thank you.
Ooh, I really like this salad dressing, or, that sort of thing, where you're mostly focused on what you're grateful for, what you like, or, and recognizing the effort.
Of negativity.
I really didn't know how to cook very well when we first got married, Fontaine. I
will toot my own horn here, though. I may have a problem with criticism, but this is one place I did not make a mistake. When we first got married, I was so grateful that you wanted to feed me. I was so, and I never criticized your food ever.
Yeah, that was smart.
No, there was one time.
There's one time I put too much salt in the eggs.
And I didn't criticize it. I just couldn't eat it.
I couldn't. Yeah.
But and from that day until now, I have been very. I think that was a wise choice.
Yes,
to not
I
criticize.
did. I think so too. Anyway, but it really motivated me to go, hey, they're eating it, they're enjoying it, they're grateful for it.
And I did, though.
But it made me want to be better.
Oh, and you have gotten so much better.
Yes, definitely.
The meals you make are like Thanksgiving dinner every night. I used to brag to my coworkers back, when I would take some of the food into work, and I would brag to my coworkers. They're like, "What are you eating?" I'm like, "Oh, it's just leftovers from last night." And they'd be like, "What?" And they were all impressed, like, "Wow, your wife's like a gourmet chef." And I'm like, "I know."
It's because he never would criticize, and it just got me so motivated.
See, so there you go. If you want delicious food, don't criticize.
Don't criticize.
There it is. There's the lesson.
The big secret.
So, I made a realization when we were preparing for this podcast, Hannah. I made the realization, and the thought came to me about my son, who is in speech therapy. He has a kind of a little lisp, and so he's getting some help for that. And we had a speech therapist who, and this is all...
We're going to criticize her here.
It's all remote.
No.
Well, no, I made an observation. She never made any corrections to what he was doing. He would say his R's wrong, or his S's wrong, or his words in the wrong way, and she would never say anything about it.
She would say, "Good job."
Great. Oh, that's great.
Good
Keep
job.
going. And he learned nothing. And he did not progress with her
he was
for
with
like a year.
Months. Well, no, it was months and months, because it was after the COVID lockdowns that we had to switch over to this.
Wasn't the same lady, though, before that?
No.
Okay, well, he didn't make progress for a very long time.
Yes.
He didn't make any progress at all with this one speech therapist.
Where we were like, it was just like an extra thing for us to do, and it was a waste of time.
It was. No, it was worse than a waste of time, because she was telling him that he was doing fine, when in reality he was doing it wrong. he was still saying the words wrong. So it was reinforcing the wrong behavior because she never gave him any sort of, I don't want to say criticism.
Well, because he would ask her, how did I do? Because he wanted a percentage, because his previous teacher would say, hey, you got 80% right or 85%. And she was very meticulous about how well he would do when she would quiz him. Mm-hmm. And she would tell, this new one would say, you did 100%. And he's like, Mom, I'm 100% now.
And we're like, no, you're not.
No, you're not.
If anything, he was backsliding because it was reinforcing the wrong habits.
Yeah, and so we were listening, and we're like, wow, he's saying all these things wrong, and we're like, either the teacher can't hear him, or she's not, just doesn't want to correct him.
And so that's kind of like the polar opposite of the experience you had with making food, where when the kids would criticize, it totally ruined the motivation for you to keep cooking, where there was all this criticism. Well, the opposite was with my son, where he got no criticism and there was no progress.
Well, and then we realized, wait a minute, criticism and correction are two different things.
And that's what I want to talk about today.
Yeah, and so understanding, okay, what is the difference between the two, and how can you have the benefits of corrections and teaching moments versus criticism?
And we're going to stay true to
kills your motivation.
Oh, and we're going to stay true to the original premise that you should never criticize. And so let's just talk about that. I kind of think there's 3 parts to this, where that basically we need to define what is criticism, number 1. Number 2, why is it so destructive? And then the rest of the podcast, we're going to talk about what to do instead. Like, what's the better alternative? And hopefully we've got enough examples to kind of make this seem obvious. Like, oh, that makes so much more sense. Hopefully, because when I finally understood the correct way to do it, it really did help me be better. I still got a long way to go, but not criticizing.
Articulating what it means to correct versus criticize is important, because a lot of people have lumped it all into one. And similar to this speech therapy teacher who wasn't giving valuable corrections that were needed, a lot of people have said, oh, don't ever tell a child that they've done something wrong, and don't just say, good job, good job. And this is a new theory of teaching that's come along, where I know teachers at like various schools where they're saying, yeah, and we're being required that we can never mark that a kid did something wrong on a piece on their homework.
There's this new push to get rid of grades altogether. And this is part of the everybody gets a trophy mentality, where it's actually very unhelpful.
Yeah.
And it admires everybody in mediocrity.
Yeah. And so if you don't articulate what the difference between criticism and correction is, you'll fall into that trap of, oh gosh, I should never tell anybody they did anything wrong.
Right. And so we're going to delineate very clearly. There's a big difference between criticism and correcting.
Yeah.
And criticism, we say no. Correcting, yes.
Absolutely. It's a very positive thing.
And having said that, let's define what criticism is. Criticism is, well, the dictionary definition says to censure or to find fault with or to judge. I'm like, okay, that's kind of a partial definition, but the idea is, your criticism is where you're focusing on what's wrong, but you're only focusing on what's wrong at the expense of everything that's right. So it's straining at a gnat but swallowing a camel, that concept where you can't see the forest through the trees. Like you get myopic, you get tunnel vision. There's this, there's this amazing car and somebody's worked really hard to put it together, and like, the window isn't clean. You're like, wait, what? I built this car from scratch and I painted it and I put it in the engine and I put in these, did all this work, and you're focusing on a window that's not clean.
A smudge on the window.
Like, yeah. So you're missing the big picture. So that's kind of what criticism is, where it's nitpicking, but it's at the expense though of focusing on what all the good. And so, well, for instance, like we talk about in our payday video, where we focus on on what's right. And we talk about reward. It's super positive. It's all really trying to motivate the person to keep going and to reward them for all their hard work and to recognize all the effort that they've put in, and which is why it's so critical, when mom and dad go on Moneypants and they're working to develop their own habits and be consistent in their work ethic, they go, oh,
this is really hard.
This is really hard. And all of a sudden it's really cool because you appreciate how hard your kids are working to, oh, wow, you know what? You did write in your journal every day that week except one. I have the same goal and I only wrote in my journal twice. Wow. Okay. I see how difficult it is. And I am even more appreciative of the effort you're putting in. And it really does go a long way to diffusing that desire to criticize when you're using Moneypants as a mom and a dad.
Well, that reminds me of, when I've just had a baby and I'm stuck in bed. I'm supposed to stay in bed and to recover for a certain period. And sometimes it ends up being longer than others, depending on, what happened during labor. Well, I've noticed, I've observed this, is while I'm laying there in bed, I can hear what's going on in the house. And I can hear how people are handling problems and whatnot. And I'll realize, wait, all these people are, helping me out and stuff. But in my mind, I'm like criticizing a lot of what's going on outside. Like, why isn't this happening? Why isn't that happening? And it's so easy to criticize when you're not the one working and you're not the one trying to manage it. It's really easy to go, well, they should have done this or they should have done that. And so it always makes me laugh because it's almost like I can't help it though, where I'm like, I should be very grateful, but I'm laying here doing nothing. But I'm criticizing the people who are working. In my mind, that's what happens. And I know that that's what's happening, but I'm like, a lot of times people who are very critical, you realize you're like, it's because they don't have anything to do. It's because they're not working. Yes. And so that's why it's really important that the parents be on Moneypants as well, is because once you're the one in there doing the work and working on yourself and working on your own goals, then you're not as critical of anybody else, because it just puts you on the same plane where a lot of times people, when they're retired or something like that, if they don't fill up that retirement with working and contributing in a meaningful way, if they actually have nothing to do, they can start to become a busybody. Or, telling other people, and fall into that trap of, well, you're doing this wrong. You're raising your kids wrong. How did your toddler get out of the house? Where you're like, do you not remember how hard this is?
or your yard isn't perfectly clean, or your chickens are getting out, or or your fence needs repairing, and they just critical. If you don't have enough to do, if you're not working on yourself and working, it is really easy to criticize other people. And so that's kind of a little remedy there is, okay, make sure you're doing it. But going back to this definition of criticism, it really, I think that there are three parameters that really define what criticism is. And I like the dictionary definition. That's fine. The whole idea of to censure or to find fault with. And then I added in the, at the expense of seeing what's good. But really, at its core, criticism is personal, it's destructive, and it's selfish. And I think if we can get away from those three things, we're going a long way to avoid criticism, because criticism is selfish, it's destructive, and it's personal. And what I mean is, here's an example where you may be during job time and you're the job inspector and you go and, maybe I'm inspecting Falcon's job and I say, you did sloppy work. You're just being lazy. You didn't even wipe the counters correctly. Well, that's destructive. That's very unmotivating for him, but it's a personal attack.
There's a lot of you there.
Yeah. And it's all about, and it's trying to make me feel better. Like it's not considering him or his motives or how it affects him. I think and it's so easy to criticize. That's the problem, Hannah. It's so easy to criticize it. I think we're wired that way, to see the wrong, to see what's missing, what's out of place. Even back when we were little kids, when we were watching Sesame Street, and one of these kids is doing his own thing. One of these kids is doing it wrong.
Doesn't belong.
Where I think we're just kind of programmed to see what's out of place, what's wrong, what's missing, what's broken, and as opposed to focusing on all the good. And so it's really kind of a reprogramming of our brains. And Moneypants relies on that. It relies on parents and everybody in the family kind of working together as a team. We keep going back to this team idea, this team mentality of, and if you've ever been on a team and your teammates are criticizing you, does that motivate you to try harder? Does that ever work?
Oh, Falcon was on a team like that, where the teammates would criticize each other. Like, you dropped the ball and la la la, that, and they'd get mad at each other, and it totally ruined the team morale. And then the next year, he was on another team that was one of the best team in the league. They ended up being the champions. And if one of the teammates started getting down on one of their teammates for dropping the ball or messing up, the coach would just
put the kibosh on
it. And it was so smart because later we played this other team and they were being so mean to each other.
To each other.
And it was just sad. It took all the fun out of playing.
Yeah.
It destroyed their confidence.
Well, you're so worried about making a mistake because you're going to get criticized that you
by your friends,
that you actually end up making
teammates.
More mistakes.
Yes.
And it's this horrible downward, miserable spiral.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to be on a team like that. In the pros, they call that the locker room.
Yeah.
The vibe in the locker room, where there's locker room leadership, where it's how the players interact with each other behind the scenes. When they're not on the field, and if they're always criticizing each other behind the scenes, it destroys team morale, and it makes the team worse. And no team that has infighting ever goes very far. That's not how it works,
A lot of times criticism, unfortunately, we see that now, like on the internet, when people leave feedback and make comments. Yeah. And the thing is it's destructive, and it's destructive because they're saying things you would never say to a person face to face because it would hurt their feelings.
Yeah.
And so there's no consideration of, hey, this is a person and that I'm saying this to, and they're going to read this, they're going to see this, they're going to take this personally. And so the comments that get left are things people would never, ever, ever say to a person face to face.
But a lot of times they're scathing and downright awful.
Yeah, where people commit suicide and stuff after, getting, they make a mistake or they do something wrong because the comments people leave are just so harsh. They're harsh. Well, and then criticism is harsh.
Well, that leads right into the second question, which is, why is criticism so destructive? And I think that's exactly it, where it takes away, we've already talked about this, it takes away your motive for improvement. It makes you angry. It's inherently selfish. It damages relationships. I mean, like you said, I did all this work to make these menus, to make these wonderful meals. I went shopping and created a meal only to have you criticize it. Like, I don't want to do that anymore. I have no desire to do that. You go get McDonald's or you go heat yourself up a TV dinner. Like, forget it. Why did I waste my time and energy?
So the criticism, it's focused on the person. You're stupid. You're sloppy. You're lazy.
Right. It's a personal attack. Personal attack.
It's where you're giving them a negative label. You're labeling them as something negative. You're a loser. You're
incompetent. You're sloppy. You're lazy. You're dumb.
Yeah, you're basically pasting a label on them and labeling them in some negative way.
Does that ever help?
Yeah,
like, here's the thing.
It never helps to give somebody negative labels.
If criticism and negative labels helped, everyone would be perfect by now.
Right.
You could criticize your kids into perfection. It'd be great.
Yeah.
You just go around, criticize this and this and this, and the kids who are the most criticized would be the most successful.
Yeah, you're stupid. You're an idiot. You're.
It does not work. Yeah.
So criticism puts negative labels on people. So it's a personal attack. It's destructive. It's always has a negative. It's focused on the negative. And then what was the last one? It's selfish, meaning the motive, the underlying motive isn't actually to help the other person.
That's it.
It's to vent your frustrations, or it's to make yourself feel superior.
A lot of us, though, we have these inferiority complexes, or we have these issues that we're working through. And in order to make ourselves feel better, we got to put others down, and we got to get away from that, because that's what criticism is.
Well, you noticed, and I've noticed that, for example, if you're struggling with depression at any point, like if you're feeling depressed or angry, it is almost impossible not to criticize.
Yep.
It is like so hard. I found
there's a stream of negativity flowing through your brain, and it doesn't matter what you say, Hannah, it will come out as negative.
Yes, and so I think that's why.
To not say anything.
Yeah, that's where that came from. Is if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all, because sometimes you have to just let those moments, those times pass,
it's
and
hard,
just
Hannah. It's so
not
hard.
say anything. Because I noticed, like, if I'm having a hard time and there's a lot of negativity inside me that's not resolved, and I open my mouth and try to compliment somebody, it always has a negative twist to it. Like,
it's true.
You can't even make it like you try, and it just turns.
You look really good today.
Sure wish, but with I wish I wasn't so ugly. Like it just, everything has like a negative twist to it. So sometimes, you just have to realize, gosh, I'm not doing well right now. I'm not going to make any comments.
Well, no, but I think criticism is kind of like complaining, basically, but you're not offering any possible solutions. It's just complaining.
Yeah.
And again, that doesn't help anybody. That doesn't motivate anybody to do better.
Is my heart filled with love towards this person? If not, I shouldn't say anything.
Right.
And so, that's because you can love somebody who did something wrong, or somebody that needs a correction, and it changes how you go about it, and the tone, and but if you are about to say something and you don't like that person, just shut it.
Yeah.
If you don't feel love for that person, don't say what you're about to say.
Yeah.
So,
and if your goal, so let's talk about that. That leads right into the second half of the podcast, which is we're going to talk about the alternative. What's better? What we should do instead of criticizing. And because here's the thing, Hannah, if going back to my son's speech teacher, I think maybe she had bought into the idea that you never criticize, and therefore she chose to never say anything negative at all. But that's not helpful. She bought into that. She kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater, where she not only did she not criticize, but she also didn't correct.
She didn't know what to do.
Right. And so I think what I want to talk about now is what the alternatives are. Instead of, we say never criticize, well, what do you do instead? And this is it. You can critique, but I think a better term would be correct. To offer corrections. And so a correction focuses on how the other person will feel after receiving the correction. The golden rule, treat others how you'd want to be treated. If you're about to say something nasty, like, man, you are so awful at wiping the counters, or you made your bed. What are you, 2 years old? Well, how would you feel if the tables were turned and someone was saying that to you? So maybe think about that first before you say something. Say, wait. How can I do this in the most constructive way possible? And think of it as a correction rather than as a criticism. Where
so instead of we said earlier that you have, it's personal, it's selfish, and it's destructive. So one of the keys is to make it not personal. So instead of saying, "Gosh, you made this bed like a 2-year-old would," instead say, "Okay, Johnny, all right, you made your bed, great.
It would look better.
It would look better if you pulled the corners and made it smoother. And look how nice that looks.
So it's not lumpy in the middle.
Yeah. And say that makes it look that makes it look smooth and neat. Instead of focusing on the person, you focus on the object or the action, not on the person.
Right. So let's talk about some of these basic principles when giving corrections. Like you said, treat others how you want to be treated.
Okay.
Focus on what the other person needs and wants, not what you want. So again, flip the script. How would you like it if that was being said to you? And then, because that's just it. I'm thinking of, like when I was playing basketball as a kid, I wish someone had given me corrections. I would have loved to get some feedback on my shot. My shot was horrible. And I wish someone would have just said, "Oh, dude.
Hey, if you want to improve your shot, you follow through like this and like this and like this. This is how you do it. So it's
I
instead
wanted
of
that.
Don't think of it as criticizing. Think of it as teaching or making suggestions.
Well, the difference would have been
improvement.
if someone come up to me and said, "Dude, your shot stinks. Where'd you learn to shoot?" Well, that's a criticism. Whereas if someone said, "Hey, dude, your shot would be so much better if you did this and this. Let me show you." I would have been, Hannah,
that would have been.
That would have made my life so much, my
That shows
basketball
that
career
you
so much
care.
better.
That shows that you care about somebody. Well, it's funny. I had a daughter who was taking ballet, and she got all upset because she's like, the teacher's picking on me. She comes over and, shows me I'm doing something wrong in front of the whole class, and she got really embarrassed. And I said, no, honey, you don't understand. Ballet teachers, if they're coming over and correcting you, they always correct the kids in the class that have the most potential. And if they're not, and you understand this if you've been in ballet long enough, that if the teacher's not coming by and correcting you, it's because they don't think you're going anywhere.
But that's true of any sport.
Yeah.
Where the football players who get the most attention are the ones with the most
natural
potential,
talent.
and they get the most corrections. If you're not getting corrections in your sport, that's usually a bad sign. That means that because
it's not worth their time.
Yeah. And that's usually a sign that you're probably not very good. And you're going to have to go somewhere else to get the corrections you need. So corrections are good.
Corrections are a compliment.
And that you want.
Yeah.
But I think, so another principle when giving corrections is to focus on what to do instead of what not to do. And I think more often than not, we have a tendency to say, oh, don't do that. Don't do that. And toddlers come to mind. And I've had my fair share of experience with toddlers, and they're constantly being told no. Everybody around them's telling them no because they're getting into everything. Oh, they put the phone in the microwave again. Oh, they're carrying around a knife. Oh, they're doing this. What's better is that when they're carrying around the knife, instead of saying, "Oh no, don't do that with a knife. Don't carry a knife." See, I'm just telling them what not to do. What would be better is to say, "Hey, Tank, let's put the knife on the counter."
Yeah.
And all of a sudden he knows what he can do, and it's encouraging, but it's also empowering for the toddler to know the right thing to do because they don't know. They're a toddler. They're 2, they're 3. They don't know any better. So when you take them by the hand and say, "Hey, that rag that you threw on the ground, let's put that in the sink instead so it can get washed." And you take them by the hand and lead them, and they put it in the sink. And then guess what happens next time there's a rag on the ground?
They go put it in the sink.
Because they want to be helpful. They want to do what's right. And it's exciting and empowering to them to get that information.
Yeah. And so kids, if you're like, "Oh, I don't want them playing over here. I don't want them playing in the house." Mm-hmm. Instead of saying, "Don't play here, don't play here, don't go here, don't touch this," give them the idea of what they should be doing.
Right.
Say, "Go play over there. Go, why don't you guys go play basketball right now?" And that is so much more. Yeah.
Go swing on the swing set.
Yeah. Go do this. Go do that. And all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, okay."
It's a great idea.
And they go do it, where that works better than saying, "Oh, don't touch that. Mm-hmm. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that." Focus on what to do. And criticism's the same way. Instead of saying, "You did that wrong. Don't do it like that. Don't do it like that."
Yeah, at what point do they know the right thing?
Instead, it's a lot more effective, and it's more motivating if you say, "Do it like this. Do it like that.
Focus on what they can do. This is how you do
it." Yeah, and teach them and say, so like a common correction I'll give, like when I'm teaching 4-year-olds how to wipe the table, the dining room table, is I'll say, "Okay, now lean your head to the side because the table's kind of glossy, and lean your head to the side. Do you see any smudges? I see one over there. I see one. Okay, after you do that, now go wipe that area. Then come back. Now how does it look? Okay, that was a correction." And they're not offended by it. They're like, "Oh, that's how you do it."
Yes.
That's how you do it. "Okay, lean your head to the side. What do you see? Okay, you see the smudge there and there? You got to go get those. Go get those."
Well, and the cool thing is,
so you're focused on how to do it and what to do, not "you did this wrong. This is awful. You do sloppy work."
Well, and I will notice my own kids telling each other no. And I will stop them and I'll say, instead of saying no, perhaps tell them what they should do instead.
Yeah.
Like I'm actually teaching them to give corrections.
It reminds me of you, Fontaine, where you worked on jobs where they didn't manage their office correctly, or they didn't use correct techniques in the skills that you were hoping to learn. And this was when we were young newlyweds, and you would say, gosh, and maybe in school you didn't learn things right from your teachers and stuff like that. And you'd say, I can learn a million ways to do it wrong, but at some point I need to learn to do these things right.
Yes.
I can learn what not to do.
Yeah.
There are so many things not to do, but it would sure be nice to be shown.
It will never teach me the right way to do it. I'll just learn 1,000 ways to not do it.
Yeah, it sure would be nice to just learn the right way. Okay, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. Oh, that's a bad idea too. And you were really craving the opportunity to just have somebody show you how to do things correctly.
And then we finally got to Hollywood, and wow, some of those. Now, not all the companies did it right either, but I worked with a few companies, and they did it right, and it was so wonderful to know the right way to do things.
How to do things correctly and professionally. And so it's the same with when you're giving corrections. If you're constantly, that's wrong, that's not good enough, blah, blah, blah. There's 1,000 ways you can do things wrong. Focus on what to do. Yeah,
what's the right thing to do. Well, no, that reminds me of we did the family council podcast. It's kind of the same idea where you can't bring up complaints unless you have a possible solution. Like you can't bring up a problem unless you suggest something to do. And that's a correct principle where, and you know what? That's just it. Hannah, Moneypants, the whole concept of Moneypants really is set up for giving corrections, not criticism. And we've talked about, job inspections, but payday, well, I guess we'll talk about this in a minute, where you could fall into the trap of being critical, but really inspections are an opportunity to correct, where you have these clearly laid out lists of jobs and you have the description and like, this is what needs to be done here, 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 and here. And so when you're comparing and doing the job inspection, you say, okay, great. You got the sink done. You did the counters well. Looks like the baseboards are dirty. So you got to finish that.
Yeah.
And it takes all the emotion out, and it's just a correction as opposed to a criticism. And same with payday, and we talk about this, but I can't hit this point home hard enough. Payday has to be positive. Payday has to be about rewards and compliments and no criticism at all on payday, because how hard they're working. Now, if you criticize it, like you said, Hannah, it destroys motivation. So, okay. So I guess that begs the question, though, isn't criticism necessary sometimes? Isn't it sometimes necessary to criticize? And to that we answer, no. No, it's not. Criticism is never necessary. Corrections, on the other hand, are constantly necessary, especially when you are raising children, especially if you're a coach, especially if you're a business leader. Corrections are constantly necessary. And if you're not correcting, you're not doing your job. That's your job.
You're not teaching. And correcting and teaching, we're going to use those interchangeably.
Because
as a parent, you should be teaching.
Well, what's the example that I love? It's the air traffic controller. When the guy is flying the plane in to land and the air traffic controller's like, oh, you idiot. Turn 2 degrees to the right. You're on the wrong runway. You're such a fool. Where did you learn to fly? No, that's not what he says. The air traffic controller goes, turn 2 degrees to the right. Come in on, you're coming in, you're too high, you're too hot, whatever. Nose down, blah, blah, blah. He's giving corrections, not criticisms. And does the pilot resent him for those corrections? No, the pilot's actually anticipating those.
And the pilot relies on those.
And needs those.
Yes.
And if he doesn't get them, there's something really wrong, and something could go terribly wrong. So that's the idea of a correction versus a criticism. It's a teaching moment. It's a guiding moment. And that's, Hannah, if I could get this down pat in my life, I would be so good. I would be so good. I know I have work to do, but that's the whole concept. And I really like this, where going back to my son's speech teacher, she didn't understand that, where she withheld those corrections. And by doing so, withheld my son's progress. And that's a real bummer. It was actually a waste of time. Just like if the air traffic controller was like, oh, I don't want to give this guy corrections. I'm worried I'm going to hurt his feelings. And he crashes the plane.
Yeah.
Well, which is better? Not only would you not hurt his feelings, but you saved his life too. So it's kind of an extreme
and
example.
The air traffic controller's not calling them, hey, you idiot, lower the plane. The 3 degrees. You want to die? You want to kill everyone? What?
Well, and then
who taught you how to fly?
Where'd you get your license?
It's focused on
Dolly Dinkle Flight School.
You need to do this. Okay, bring it in. Okay, good. Blah blah blah. All right, You're clear to go. It's just focused on.
It's not personal.
It's not personal.
What were the 3 things? It's not personal.
It's not selfish.
It's not selfish.
And it's not destructive.
And it's not destructive. It's impersonal, or it's focused on not the person but something else. It's constructive, and it's
showing what to do,
and it's helpful.
Yeah. And it wasn't for their own ego or benefit.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I'm going to help you.
Yeah, the air traffic controller's not stoking his own ego by telling him where to go.
He's doing his job.
Just doing his job.
He's doing his job.
So, but you brought up a good point too, Hannah, where there's also this concept of internal criticism, where you would go shopping.
I would, when I would go shopping, a lot of times, I'd try on clothes, and if the clothes didn't look good on me or didn't fit right, I would go, oh, I'm unattractive. Oh, I'm fat. I'm a pig. I eat too much, and I need to lose weight, or there's no sense in even coming shopping. And I'd leave the store just feeling like garbage, being like, oh man, I'm a very unattractive person. None of those clothes looked good on me. And I've got to stop, eating.
And how did that make you feel?
Awful.
Did it motivate you? To do the right
so
thing?
I ended up wearing big T-shirts and trying to hide my body or whatever, because I was like, oh, I'm not attractive, and clothes don't fit me.
No.
And so anyway, one time I remember going shopping with my dad, and I was a teenager, and I was really embarrassed to go shopping. I'm like, oh, I hate shopping. I hate trying on clothes. And
for good reason, yeah.
And it was embarrassing to come out and, oh, this doesn't look good on me. And I because I was personally attacking myself. Mm-hmm. And I was surprised when my dad was like, because I'd come out in something that didn't look good. And I was mortified because I was totally blaming myself. And my dad's like, you know what? That does not flatter, that dress does not flatter your figure. Let's find a different style. Let's find something different. Whereas he understood of, hey, different clothes are made for different body types. Let's find something that looks good on you that was made for you.
It wasn't an attack on your body or
I
your
know,
body
and
shape.
he didn't say, and I was like, okay, and went and tried, and then he's like, that looks good, but the color isn't matching your skin tone. That's the wrong color for you. We need to find the right color. And I was like, oh.
What a difference.
Okay, let's do that.
Instead of focusing on what not to do, he was focusing on
let's find a different style. Let's try something, with a longer waist or with, and I was like, I don't know that we bought anything, but my mind was kind of blown by that. I was like, oh.
But your dad is like the master he's like a master teacher where he
does. He likes to teach. And I also noticed one thing that he would do, because he was very patient, but he would often say, if something needed a correction, he would make suggestions. He'd say, oh, you might want to, do blah, 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 mm-hmm. and try that out. And the reason why is because, and then he'd explain some principle or something, but you might want to try this out, and it might make it fly higher. You might taste, it might bring out the flavor better if you add a little more salt. Try that next time. Add it, you might want to try this. You might want to try this. And it would
get you excited to
try
it.
And you're like, oh, okay. Yeah, I want to do it again. I want to try this and see if I can improve it.
Well, not only that, you would want to get feedback from him.
Exactly.
And you valued the feedback
I was never offended by the feedback.
So there's this false notion, Hannah. There's this false notion that by giving corrections, you're offending people. That is blatantly false. That is,
No.
having been
I
on the
never
receiving
felt
end
offended.
and craving correction and not getting it,
Yeah.
I know that correction is not a bad thing.
I always felt grateful for it. And I was sometimes PO'd that my dad didn't give more of it. I'm like, why didn't he say that if he knew that?
Why? Oh, that's a phrase right there. Why didn't you say something?
Why didn't you say something?
Well, maybe they had nothing nice to say.
Yeah. Anyway,
So,
but I if you're uncomfortable giving corrections, think of my dad giving his suggestions. Hey, you might want to try this. It might improve it this way. You might want to try this, and this is why.
So
You might want to try this, and this is why.
and I want to talk about that, where giving corrections is all about two things. So now this is part of the podcast.
Wait.
Oh, did you have-
So
go
you
ahead.
might want to try this, and this is why. The why part is the teaching part.
Oh, right.
Okay, so he was teaching. He'd give a suggestion. He wouldn't just give a suggestion. He'd give a suggestion, and he'd explain the why behind it. And so you're like, you
That's
would
like the
learn
perfect
something.
formula. Yeah.
Yeah.
The perfect pattern.
Yeah,
Right there.
and so it wasn't offensive, and it was you learned something, and you learned the principle underneath it, and it was very satisfying.
Well, let's talk about that. Where when giving corrections, it's basically two aspects: your motives and your methodology. Why you're doing it and how you do it. And I think we've kind of discussed like why you would want to do a correction versus a criticism. And I think we've established that criticism is bad. Corrections, on the other hand, are the opposite. Not only are they good, they're absolutely necessary. And so the first part of giving corrections is your motives. And this isn't a big topic. Why you're giving corrections, I think you need to ask, why am I doing this? Why am I saying what I'm saying? And we talked about this last week with our Never Lie podcast, where you need to pay attention to what comes out of your mouth. The same holds true when it comes to criticizing versus giving corrections. When you're giving corrections, you need to think about, why am I giving this correction? First of all, are you trying to build somebody up, trying to help them to motivate, trying to help them do better? And you brought up a good point too, Hannah. And I guess the good question would be, is your goal to humiliate or to motivate? And if it's to humiliate, it's a criticism. If it's to motivate, it's probably a correction. Are you trying to keep them down and to try to satisfy your own ego? That's not a good motive for giving a correction. And if that's the case, maybe just log that one away and not say anything. And, I think of the example.
Do you love someone or do you hate them?
Yeah. And if it's out of hate or spite or anger, maybe refrain. Maybe just hold off. And this holds true on Facebook and YouTube and any other place where you can leave comments. If your motive is hatred or anger, don't do it. Just refrain. If you don't have something, seriously, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. It sounds so, I don't know, old fashioned, but boy, if there were ever a time in history where we needed it more, it's now. To have cordial conversation instead of this just flood of negativity on all of social media, where it's just like, you're stupid and I hate this and this is dumb. Whoa, let's just back off a little bit. But I'm reminded of, and I heard this analogy a long time ago. I've never seen it myself. I don't know if it's true, but I like the idea anyway. It's the whole idea of when these fishermen, they catch lobsters and they put them in the tank. And if the lobsters were to just, I think, go too high, if they'd stand on top of each other too high, they could get out of the tank. But because lobsters are the way they are, what happens is one lobster tries to get out and the other lobsters pull it down. And so what happens is they actually keep themselves in their own prison because none of them will let the other ones climb out of the tank. It's the weirdest thing. And I'm like, that's what criticism is, where it never allows anybody to rise above. Criticism pulls people down.
Pulls everyone down.
It pulls everybody
keeps
down.
everybody down.
So, so when it comes to your motives for giving corrections, I think most parents want what's best for their children. I'm going to work under that assumption. So I don't think this is really an issue, but I think the issue more is how you go about doing it. So I think let's spend the rest of the time talking about not so much your motives, but your method. How do you go about giving corrections? And we've talked about it a little bit. Your dad, I think he's a great example, making suggestions, then explaining why. But let's talk about your methodology.
I was also thinking, as we were preparing this, I had a daughter that I wanted to talk to about wearing modest clothing. And so I thought about the ways that what we had talked about not making it personal, making sure the motive was right, and not making it destructive, like not being destructive, not pulling the person down. And so I thought about, okay, you could approach it of, oh, when you wear immodest clothes, you look like a prostitute. How would that work?
Oh, no, flip it around. If someone told you that.
Yeah, you look like a prostitute.
Oh, wow, that makes me feel so good.
So is that what you want to tell your 13-year-old or your child?
My 6-year-old son?
No. you look like a tramp.
Yeah.
And when you wear clothes like that, and
So
you're
that's a personal attack?
You're never going to catch you're going to attract the worst guys and blah, blah, blah.
No, that's a personal attack. It's negative and it's selfish. That's just, blah.
Yeah.
That's all sorts of wrong.
Yeah. And so I thought, okay, your body is beautiful. You are beautiful. I want you to treat your body as sacred. I want you to treat it with respect, though, because it is sacred. And I want the guys who date you to know that they need to respect you, because I love you and I don't want them to see you as just,
eye candy.
Yeah. I want them to see
trophy wife, trophy girlfriend.
I want them to see you for who you are, not just you make me look good, showing, I'm going to show off this girl that makes me look good. So I looked at the two ways that you could approach it, where, hey, look, you need to stop wearing that because
you can criticize.
You need to stop doing that because you look like a tramp and
you'll never get a good guy and you'll just end up white trash.
Yeah. Ooh. Whereas
that's not motivational. That's just negative and awful.
But I do need to say something.
Right.
I'm the mom, right?
And it's your, like we
it's
said,
my
it's
job.
your job. It is your job as parents to give corrections. It's the job of the coach to give corrections. What type of coach would last very long if he never gave any corrections? He just sat there and went, "Okay, guys, go play.
Yeah.
Go win the game." What?
So
got to give corrections. That's
your
job.
Making it clear, I love you.
Yeah.
And she may or may not take this, but it's not. I did my job. But I express my love. I express the beauty that she had, and also what I wanted her to also have was respect.
Right.
Because that's how she should be treated. And
so we didn't really talk about this at length, but when it comes to resolving concerns, and this kind of falls into there, where when you're resolving concerns, you don't want it to be a personal attack of you. You want it to be the object that you're discussing. And a good way to do that, Hannah, is to think of it as to kind of put it on a table nearby. So you're discussing the problem or the issue rather than the person.
Yeah.
And so you did a great job. You're like, your body. Well, there it is over here. We're going to talk about your body and your beauty as opposed to you. We're talking about your body. It's subtle, but it's significant. When I'm inspecting somebody's job, I say, wow, you did sloppy work. Nope.
Yeah.
That's bad. I would say, oh, these counters, I see crumbs and it's not done quite right. The counter is still dirty. So it's not a personal attack. The issue is over here. You've set that problem aside and both of you can look at it. That's the cool thing is when you set the problem to the side, you can both look at it objectively, both people, and go, okay, here's the issue we're talking about. And it works way better. It's much more effective to do it that way. Corrections, the exact same concept. Here's the correction I want to discuss.
Here's the concern, or here's the, And anyway, but I was trying to think of how to apply this because, I want to keep a good relationship. And, this is a sensitive issue. So how do I approach this? Not hurting the person's feelings, but motivating them to make better choices or whatnot. So.
Exactly. And so along those lines, though, and we talked about motivation, and your motives were already right. And I think a lot of times, and this is what parents fall into this trap, their motives are right, but their methods aren't. How they go about it. And and as we just talked about, you don't want to address the person directly. You want to talk about the problem over here separately, the concern. But then you also want to avoid manipulating. You want to be straightforward and honest. And we talk, and a lot of times you hear, brutally honest, but we have a tendency when we're brutally honest to focus more on being brutal than honest.
Yeah.
And I think it's important when you're being honest, maybe tone back the brutality a little bit. Where I think, Hannah, you did a great job where you were being honest, and you don't need to be brutally honest. Just be honest and be straight, but being straightforward.
Well,
this is my concern.
Yeah. I could say, wow, you do look like a prostitute. Well, that's true. She does, I could, you could
your
say,
teenagers,
you could justify
your 13-year-old daughter
saying
shows up in a tube top. Yeah.
I was being brutally honest. I was being honest.
What 13-year-old girl doesn't go through that process? The heavy makeup and the tube top and the booty shorts. And you're like, wow, you look in the high boots. And you're like, wow, you look like a prostitute. And it's true. But is that helpful at all? Is that
helpful?
No,
that's being brutal. And so
but also, but at the same time, though, and we go into, even Jesus taught this, where he says, let your communication be yay, yay, nay, nay, where you're not mincing words. You're not, yes means yes, no means no. That's what that scripture means. Where let your communication be yay, yay, nay, nay. And a lot of people are like, I don't even know what he's talking about. Well, I'll explain it. What he says is, when you say yes, it means yes. And when you say no, it means no. In other words, be straightforward in your talk. But also he says, in roughly the same time, Jesus said, if you got a problem with somebody, talk to them in private. So you don't need to give corrections in front of the whole family.
If there's a sensitive topic or something
that doesn't
like
really
that.
apply to payday and to job time per se. But if there's something a little more, kind of a sidebar, I guess, is if there is a problem and you need to give a correction, maybe work on the timing.
Most corrections should be done in private.
Now, we do suggest having payday in front of everybody, and that's why we say there shouldn't be any criticism. There should be no criticism at all during payday. It should be focused 100% on all the positives.
But corrections for the job, even that, it's done privately. It's okay. All right, let's go take a look at your job.
You don't pull everybody together and say, all right, everybody.
Hey, look what he did with the counters.
Yeah.
So yeah, even when we do the podcast, even we try to, if it's a negative comment or a criticism, we don't name the names of the people or we're not specific.
Yep.
But if we have a compliment, it was this person.
Well, but at the same time, going back to the whole idea that sometimes, not sometimes, you need to give corrections. What's the phrase? Only your true friends will tell you your face is dirty. Where if you kind of approach it that way, because again, there's this mentality that, you can't give corrections. You can't give criticism because that makes you bad and they're going to be offended. Would you be offended if you're out with a group of friends and you had chocolate smeared on your cheek and one of your friends said, hey, dude, you got chocolate on your face? Would you be offended by that?
Well,
or if your zipper's down and one of your friends pulled you aside and said, hey, your zipper's down.
Yeah. Now that pulling aside is important. Back to hey, you should do it in privacy.
Right.
Because some people are like, hey, your zipper's down. Then everybody looks and sees
and then you're embarrassed. Yeah,
and then you're like more embarrassed. You're like, hey, that was kind of a jerk thing. You probably should have just told me quietly so I could fix the problem and not be more embarrassed than I need to be. So yeah, the motives.
But going back to let's go back to payday. Let's give an example of what it means to give a correction versus a criticism. Where on payday, here's a bad example. You're such a slacker, you didn't write in your journal once this week. That would be a criticism. See how it's personal, it's negative, and it's destructive. Would that motivate them to want to write in their journal next week? No. A much better approach would be, wow, you wrote in your journal 2 times this week. Excellent. What can I do to help? I know it's your goal to write in your journal. What can I do to help? What do you need? All of a sudden, the motive is totally different. The vibe is totally different. I notice that you could even say, I notice you're writing late at night and sometimes you're too tired. Maybe you could try writing at lunchtime or in the morning the day after.
Yeah, and it's not selfish because it's like, oh, it's your goal.
Yeah, it's your goal.
It's
this
your
is
goal.
something you want to accomplish.
This is what you want to do.
Yeah.
And so you're focused on what they want to do, not on what you want.
And likewise with job inspections, you did sloppy work. Well,
say you want to get your consistency bonus.
Yeah.
So what? Okay, in order to get it, here's what has to be done.
You got to make sure you get those baseboards.
This will get passed off. Yep. This will get passed off, but you got to do this and this. What helps, like Trixie, who's really good at doing jobs efficiently, like if she sees that somebody's having a hard time getting their job done on time, she'll teach them, hey, it's quicker if you go about, cleaning the counters this way.
She's teaching, she's correcting. Yeah. They're synonymous, I think.
Say, you didn't pass in time. How are you doing this? She'll ask them, how are you cleaning this? And she's like, okay, listen, it's actually quicker if you do the crumbs and the wiping at the same time.
Right.
Or if you just clear the dishes and then go around with the garbage can and just swipe everything else into the garbage.
And maybe you out there in audience land think you're not a good teacher. You're wrong. Everyone can and should give corrections. And this is definitely, and as parents, and we're implementing Moneypants, it's a great opportunity. And it's a good structure to give those corrections and to develop that ability to teach and correct.
Teaching and correcting, when you have that, that's how you progress.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things about all human beings is if we're progressing, we're happy. Okay? And there's no such thing as being happy if you're not progressing, if you're not becoming a better person. And so that's why, like, Moneypants isn't just for kids. It's for adults. It's for everyone.
So think of it, you're helping other people be happy.
Yeah. So when you give these corrections, you're helping another person progress. And when they progress, they become happier. The criticism is not helping them progress, and it's actually demotivating them, and it's not good. But when you give corrections and you teach and you help a person improve, you're actually helping them to be happier. It's exciting and it's satisfying.
And so going back to this whole coaching idea too, where, and I think I've hit this point pretty hard, but I want to make sure it's very clear. Bad coaches are the ones who never correct. Bad coaches are the ones that don't teach. So a lousy coach never gives corrections. A lousy piano teacher would never correct your technique. Think of a ballet teacher or a football coach who never gives corrections.
I've had dance teachers that don't, and I'm like, I'm not getting any better.
Right.
I'm not getting any better. I know you know how to do this, but I want you to come and show me. I noticed that when you're an adult and you go take a ballet class, a lot of times the dance teachers won't give adults corrections. Partially, some of them it's because you're not going to be on our dance team or whatever. But others, they're like, oh, you're older. You don't want me to correct you.
Wrong. That's why I'm taking the class.
Wrong. That's why I'm taking the class, is I want to improve. I want to get better at this and develop, the art and be satisfied.
Well,
but there's that misconception of, if I correct you, I'm going to offend this lady. And it's like, no, that's why I'm here.
I had a horrible basketball shot. I was probably 13, 15, somewhere around there, because nobody ever explained how to shoot the basketball to me. I just kind of chucked it at the hoop. And I have this weird underhanded thing. And I remember one day I was just goofing around and I was shooting at the basket, and this person came over.
It was my dad's cousin.
Who came over, pulled me aside, didn't know this. And instead of even asking me, she just said, hey, this is better form. And she put my arms in the right place. And first of all, she demonstrated it, but then she put my arms in the right place and kind of showed me the right way to shoot. Didn't ask. And it stuck with me though, because it told me that she cared about me and wanted to see me succeed. And here I am, 30 years later, that stuck with me. Where just that one little moment of somebody cared enough to teach me the correct way to do something. I wasn't upset. It wasn't frustrating.
I think my dad's family, for all their faults and problems,
they're good teachers.
They're good teachers. Yeah. They're good coaches. They understand how to teach, because it turned out, like years later, I met this woman who had shown my husband how to shoot and had taken a little bit of time to help him, you know. And I looked at her and I'm like, "What's your name? You look like you're related to me." And it turned out it was my dad's cousin. And so,
what a random.
Yeah.
That just
a small world after all. So
I think to kind of recap, I think it's incredibly important that we avoid criticism but then when we do replace criticism with corrections and teaching, we need to make sure of two things: that our motives are good and our methods are good. And as long as we focus on those things, I think everyone around us will be much happier and progress a lot faster. And that's it. You know, that's the whole concept. Don't criticize, instead correct.
Teach, correct.
Yep. And so those are kind of our thoughts on this whole concept of criticism. Avoid it and instead replace it with correction and teaching. And that's it for today. If you like what you hear in this podcast, please tell your friends. They may want to listen too. And if you have a suggestion for a future podcast, go to our website under support and click contact us. Send us an email and we'll get right on it. And that's it for today. Enjoy some Falcon Jazz for epically exotic, effervescent entertainment. We'll see you next time.